I was just listening to Mariana. I've been posting about how I think the times have changed, and Rihanna is the top of the dance music, house music thing charts over somebody like Janet Jackson. I think she was close with Janet, but I think she's past Janet, and I think because she's making more music. Now that's a side note. I don't really talk music, although I could, because my introduction to expressing myself creatively was being a DJ. So, and I love music, so it is what it is. You know, everybody has an opinion, so don't give me, my background doesn't give me a title. I mean, an advantage. Maybe if I was making music, that'd probably be a little bit better. But anyway, I wanted to talk about kind of categories, genres. I talk a lot about that because I talk about black science fiction, and black science fiction is a category and it is a genre, you know, and it's also Afrofuturism and it's African futurism. And I was on a really nice panel that I just posted a little bit ago in Kissimmee, Florida at Fandom, and we had a really good conversation. It was three of us on there, Marcus and MD, now I forgot his name, McDonald, right? Another creator in Florida, right? And we had a nice audience, but we got a chance to talk amongst ourselves. And one of the things that, you know, we talked about that really wasn't scheduled. It wasn't a question that I had prepared to talk about, but it was a subject that came up, and that was this subject of black science fiction, you know, and what is black science fiction? And it goes all the way. I mean, I don't want to continue talking about it until something new pops up, and even then I wish we didn't have to talk about it, but it is a genre or a literary category that is emerging and defining itself, and it's going through growing pains, and those growing pains are, you know, more than just what makes it a black picture. I remember in the 90s, and even into the 2000s, we used to ask, what makes it black? Is it because it's the actor? And we say, well, now, Will Smith was good, but Independence Day isn't black. Wild Wild West isn't black. Even though the writer may have some significant rewrites in it. If the writer is black, then we say, okay, it's black. Then we had Underworld with Kevin Grievous, and he wrote Underworld. Now, he's black, but does that make Underworld a black story? No, that's debatable. Now, we know clearly if it is a black writer, director, actor, okay, it's black. Now, you know, it's black, you know, hands down, okay? But the other areas, no, we don't know, okay? I'll even argue that Underworld is a black person's interpretation of whatever area he was writing. You know, so whether it is medieval Europe, whatever it is Asian, you're still a creator of color, and that gives you an angle from your experiences wherever you were raised, whether you was raised in a black community or you was raised in a white community or an integrated community, you still experience that, in the world, and at least in the American world, saw you as who you were. So you might have seen yourself as colorless, but the reactions that they gave towards you were based on what they saw visually of you. So your experiences, regardless of whether you want to accept them or not, were those of a whatever person you are, okay? And, you know, if you were adopted, you weren't raised around black culture, that's a different type of, but still within the variations of it all. And mixed, all those different things. If you have, if you're multicultural yourself, biracial, all of that has, you know, are varying factors. But ultimately, the main factor is these are the expressions coming from the mind of a person of color, a black person, African American, that get categorized as black sci-fi, Afrofuturism, and then sub-Saharan African would probably be considered African futurism. But the bigger umbrella is, of course, black sci-fi, because that doesn't mean African American, that doesn't mean African, that doesn't mean the diaspora. diaspora, that just means black, right? So whatever that is, black sci-fi, African-American sci-fi falls under that umbrella, right? African sci-fi falls under that umbrella. I don't know which, whether they want to put African as the top umbrella and then black sci-fi, African-American sci-fi falls under that. That's fine. I don't have a problem as long as it's, clear. Now, what makes it what it is in all these genres and categories, young adult, chick lit, horror. I remember we started off the panel saying, okay, what is sci-fi? Well, horror is not sci-fi. I was like, all right, that can be okay, that can be cool. But then the mother of the whole genre was Frankenstein. And do we decide whether that is a story about a mad scientist or is it a story about the monster and the monster being scary? Well, we don't know, okay? Throw your hands up in the air because we don't know. And that's how closely some of these genres are connected, Is it young adult? Is it what defines young adult? The character, the protagonist, right? Or is it written for a young audience? And how do you write that? A lot of these things are subjective, and they're marketing techniques. They're not accurate. There's no scientific study around it to say this book is actually for this group of people. It should actually be lumped in with this. So even with black sci-fi, we might want to define it and come up with a clear description of it. But again, it is for marketing purposes. So do you want to market your story as black sci-fi and attract its readers? Who are you? What is your audience? So then that is a different category or a different question, right? And then I was reading in Dark Matter, which probably was one of the first books to discuss black science fiction. They don't even say black sci-fi in it. In the title, it says collection of African American speculative fiction, right? So that's another discussion outside from science fiction, whether it is what do you call it? Speculative fiction. So anyway, in that story, I was reading a story, article, essay probably done by Charles Delaney, right? And he's the author of Tomorrow, which is Sword and Soul, Sword and Sorcery, science fiction subcategory story, and he's almost a contemporary of Octavia Butler, right? And he was saying, that at the time he wrote the essay, it was in 2000, right? So that was before we really even had this explosion that Walter Mosley in the same book predicted, right? But in 2000, he was talking about a bunch of white writers writing African warrior stories. Now, he wrote Sword and Soul, Sword and Sorcery, and that's what he read a lot of. But he also talked about how a lot of these writers that were white writing black characters and African characters had a Tarzan type of image of Africa that they were perpetuating in their stories. It's more than just Farnham's Freehold, where you're perpetuating the myth that black people want to eat white people or black dominance lead to white oppression, right? That was what Robert Heinlein did in Farnham's Freehold. But Charles Saunders. Did I say his name all wrong? Because you got Samuel Delaney and you got Charles Saunders. So I'm talking about Charles Saunders' essay, right, on black science fiction. In his story or his essay, he says that we need only be concerned with how, we need to be concerned with how our narrative is shaped, because these white writers are writing whatever their intentions are, whether they're good, bad, malicious, or not. They're writing to their writing is shaping an image of Africa and probably even black people, which is perpetuating negative stereotypes. For instance, Africa has over 70 countries, okay? And if you want to just say sub-Saharan Africa or black Africa or what's another term they used to say? Traditional Africa. Okay, maybe that's 40 or 50 countries, right? But those countries have been liberated and countries for over 50 years, some of them. And then you've got other countries like Ethiopia that was never colonized. And these countries have had at least 4 to 5 different rulers, right? Or elected officials, whatever you want to call it. So when a white writer writes based on Idi Amin and some of the more oppressive rulers, that's really a negative impression. And it's really messed up that they write with the African ruler being represented by a type of ruler in Africa that was very, very rare. Nowhere near as there than Kwame Nkrumah, the Sekou Touré, or Nelson Mandela, who was so impressive that once he came to power, he forgave the people who had oppressed him, right? And he didn't become a black ruler who led to white oppression. Regardless of what you think about the land grabs that Mugabe did, that's still not white oppression. Taking their land, sheesh, that's not like what Hinland and some of these other white writers would infer in terms of white slavery and other types of things that they would probably put on black rulers. So what he was saying, he said, that's already going on. There was one writer, I can't even remember his name, that wrote in one of the science fiction magazines under an African name, like he was an African leader writing answers to questions and political commentary. Wow, that is also like saying Africa is all jungle and Africans are all bone and what do you call it? And cannibals, right? But that's not black writers writing that. That's white writers writing about Africa. So I mean, sure, we can get into a battle or a conversation with African writers like Ntị Okofor and others, but collectively we have a job to do, and that is to write about ourselves and our people in a way that will do them more justice than what other writers will do, because he's saying that we need to write it. Regardless whether we're romanticizing it or we're being Donald Goins to Africa, right? We want to show the brutality. It's still our job and it's our story to tell, because if not, they're going to paint one picture of it. And that's really interesting. So it's important for us to read and support each other, but for the writers, I never really thought about us having a job to tell our story and our ideology, because I never really looked at the impact of white writers who may not have Africa's best interest and African people's best interest in hand when they pick up the pen. So anyway, this is the importance of reading and the importance of writing Black Sci-Fi from a different angle that you may not have thought of before. All right, I'm out. Peace.